The names to avoid: Sarah, Marcus, Richard, Susan, Vanessa, Patricia, Ellen. Now writing the new story, the moment is burned into me. Not the words exactly, though I remember every single one, but the way my brother's face looked when he said them. That half smile he's had since we were kids. The one that means he knows something you don't, or thinks he does. He grabbed my elbow at my cousin's graduation dinner, steered me across the restaurant like I was a prop he'd forgotten to set up, and pulled me in front of his regional director. "This is my older sister, Claire," he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "She's the one we don't talk about at Christmas." He laughed. His director, a woman named Diane Holloway, did not. Neither did I. My mother, seated 2 chairs down, looked at her water glass. My father pressed his lips together in that way he does when he's embarrassed but doesn't want to admit it's my brother causing the embarrassment. Nobody said anything. The table went the way rooms go when someone says something that lands wrong. That sudden, airless quiet where everyone is waiting for someone else to fix it. Diane looked at me for a long moment. Not unkindly. More like she was cataloging something. "Claire," she said, and smiled. "Nice to meet you." That was it. My brother moved on, laughing at something someone else said, already forgetting. I stood there for another few seconds, then excused myself to the restroom, locked the door, ran cold water over my wrists, and stared at my own face in the mirror until my heartbeat came back down. I drove home by myself that night. 40 minutes on the interstate, hands steady on the wheel, but something hot and tight sitting behind my sternum the whole way. I want to be clear about something before I tell you the rest. I was not surprised. That's the part that's hardest to explain. When you spent your entire adult life being the wrong kind of person in your family's eyes, not the one they expected, not the one they planned for, a moment like that doesn't shock you. It confirms something you've already been quietly carrying, which almost makes it worse. My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 34 years old. I live in a mid-sized house in Raleigh, North Carolina that I bought myself 6 years ago, and I run a small but steady property management consulting practice that I built from nothing starting at 26. I don't have a husband or a ring or a baby shower anyone has thrown me. I have a 15-year-old rescue dog named Hector who sleeps at the foot of my bed and occasionally judges my life choices. I have 3 long-term clients who trust me completely, a reputation for getting difficult tenants and landlords and HOA boards to actually talk to each other, and a savings account that would surprise most people who know me. My family doesn't know about any of it, not the specifics anyway. To them, I've always been the one who never really settled, who moved around too much in my 20s, who didn't go to law school like my brother, who makes a living doing something with apartments, as my mother once described it at a holiday party. My brother's name is Derek. He's 31. He finished law school at 26, passed the bar on his second try, and has been working as a mid-level associate at a corporate firm in Charlotte ever since. He's the person my parents point to when they talk about the family to their friends. He's engaged now, was, at the time of the story, to a woman named Amber, whose family has money and opinions about table settings. For as long as I can remember, Derek has been the one who mattered more. Not because he earned it, but because he arrived second and louder, and knew how to make my parents feel like their choices were reflected in him. I arrived first and quieter, and made choices they didn't recognize. The dinner was for our cousin Bethany's graduation from nursing school. Bethany had put herself through the program over 4 years while working nights at a hotel front desk, and she was proud, rightfully. The restaurant was nicer than our family usually picked, Bethany's choice, and she'd invited about 20 people, including Derek's director Diane, who apparently knew Bethany through some community organization. I hadn't known Diane would be there. Derek definitely had. What I also didn't know until later, Diane Holloway had been watching Derek for a while. Not in a good way. 3 months before that dinner, my brother had called me on a Sunday afternoon. He does this occasionally. Calls when he needs something, doesn't when he doesn't. I've learned to answer anyway, because refusing feels like the argument I'd have to explain to my parents later. "I need your help with something," he said. No preamble. Amber and I are looking at a property, investment thing. Her family has some money they want to move into real estate, and I told them I knew about this stuff. "You don't know about this stuff," I said. "I know enough. I just need you to look at a few documents and tell me if anything's weird." This is how it starts, every time. A few documents. Just a quick look. Just tell me if anything's weird. Derek has a gift for making the ask sound small, for framing it so that saying no feels like the unreasonable position. I said I'd look. He sent over a package that evening, a purchase agreement for a duplex in a neighborhood outside Charlotte, a pro forma income projection, and a draft lease for the existing tenant. I opened them expecting minor issues. What I found was a mess. The income projection was fantasy. Whoever had written it had based the rental rates on comparable properties 3 neighborhoods over, in a significantly higher demand area. The actual achievable rents for that location were about 18% lower, which flipped the whole investment from marginally profitable to a slow bleed. The tenant lease had a clause that made it nearly impossible to raise rent at renewal, a mistake that would lock Amber's family into below-market rates for at least 2 years. And the purchase agreement had an inspection contingency deadline that had already passed, which meant they'd effectively waived inspection without realizing it. I called Derek that night. "None of this is as simple as you made it sound," I told him. "Okay, but can you fix it?" That phrase, "can you fix it?" as if I'm a service he subscribes to. I fixed it. I spent parts of 3 evenings drafting a counter-proposal for the lease, pulling actual rental comps for the correct neighborhood, and writing a detailed memo for Amber's family explaining the income reality versus what they'd been shown. I called the seller's agent directly and negotiated a reinstatement of the inspection contingency by framing it as a good-faith gesture the seller would want before closing. It worked. They got the inspection, found 2 HVAC issues that took $9,000 off the price. I sent Derek everything. He forwarded it to Amber's family. "They loved it," he texted me. My sister helped out with a thumbs-up emoji. His sister. Not my name. Not what I did. Just my sister helped out like I'd brought a side dish. He never asked what I charged. He never asked what I charged. He never offered. I didn't say anything because I'd made the mistake of not setting expectations up front, and at that point asking felt like a confrontation I didn't want. I told myself I'd done it for Amber's family, not for him. 2 weeks before the graduation dinner, Derek called again. Amber's family had a second property they were considering, a small commercial unit in a mixed-use building, and they wanted my take. I gave it to them. 2 hours of review, a written assessment, emailed directly to Derek to pass along. Again, no payment offered, no acknowledgement beyond a text that said, "Great, thanks." And then came the dinner, and the introduction, and his voice carrying across the table, the one we don't talk about at Christmas. I drove home on the interstate with my hands on the wheel and made a decision. 9 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, Raleigh area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Claire Donovan?" A woman's voice, measured, professional. "It is. This is Diane Holloway. We met briefly at a dinner last week. I work with your brother." I sat up straighter in my chair. "I remember. I hope this isn't too forward," she said. "I got your number through a professional directory. I looked up your firm after the dinner. I'd like to ask you something if you have a few minutes." I told her I had time. She didn't ease into it. The materials that went to the Weston family over the past few weeks, the property analysis, the income reconciliation, the lease counter-proposal, your brother presented those as his own work product. I know Amber Weston's father socially. He mentioned the documents in passing, said he was impressed by Derek's research. I looked at the formatting and the approach, and it didn't match anything I've seen from Derek in 3 years of working with him. She paused. "Did you write those?" The question landed quietly. "Yes," I said. She didn't respond right away. I listened to the silence on the line. "I thought so," she said finally. "Can I ask, do you do this professionally? Property analysis, investment review? It's a significant part of what I do. Are you currently taking clients?" Something shifted in my chest. Not a dramatic shift. A quiet one, like a door that's been stuck for a long time, finally coming loose in its frame. "I am," I said. We met in person the following Thursday at a coffee shop near her office in Charlotte. Diane Holloway turned out to be exactly what she'd sounded like on the phone. Direct, unhurried, the kind of person who doesn't fill silence just to fill it. She was probably 50, maybe a little older, with the focused attention of someone who spent her career reading people. She told me she'd been asked to oversee an expansion initiative for the property management company where she worked as regional director. They were acquiring a portfolio of 12 residential properties across 3 North Carolina counties, previously held by a family trust that was dissolving, and the existing management infrastructure was a tangle of inconsistent leases. Deferred maintenance documentation that was either absent or useless, and tenant communication records that amounted to a shoebox of handwritten notes. The person who was supposed to lead this review left the company, she said. I need someone with actual field knowledge to come in and assess the situation, build a standardized system, and help us avoid the obvious landmines before we take formal ownership. She slid a folder across the table. Scope of work, timeline, proposed compensation. I looked it over without letting my expression do anything it shouldn't. The proposed fee was $38,000 for a 4-month engagement with an option to extend. For 12 properties across 3 counties with the level of documentation chaos she was describing, it was fair. More than fair, actually. It was the kind of number that said the company understood what the work was worth. I want to be straightforward with you about something, I said. Please, she said. Derek doesn't know I do this professionally. He thinks I do occasional favors for people. If you hire him do your company, that's gonna come out. She nodded slowly. I'm aware that might be complicated. I'm not looking to make things complicated. I just want you to know what you'd be walking into. Claire, she said, and her voice had a kind of deliberate patience to it that I recognize from people who've had to say hard things in professional settings before. I'm not hiring you to make things easier for Derek. I'm hiring you because the work your brother passed off as his own was some of the clearest, most practical property analysis I've seen submitted at his level in years. If the credit belongs to you, then so does the opportunity. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said yes. The engagement started 2 weeks later. I won't make it sound more cinematic than it was. The work was unglamorous and detail-heavy, exactly the kind of work I'm good at. Lease audits on 12 units, cross-referenced against state landlord-tenant statutes. Maintenance records reconstructed from email chains and contractor invoices where formal documentation didn't exist. Tenant communication logs standardized and uploaded to a shared platform. Rent rolls corrected for 3 properties where the previous management had miscalculated annual increases. I drove a lot, Raleigh to Greensboro, Greensboro to Asheville, back again. I kept Hector with me on the longer stretches. He's very old and very patient, which are qualities I aspire to. Somewhere in the middle of the 3rd month, Derek called. He'd found out. The way people find out things in families. Through peripheral conversation. Someone mentioning something to someone else, eventually reaching him. He called from a number I hadn't blocked yet. You're working for Diane, he said. Not a question. I am. You didn't tell me. You didn't ask what I did for work, I said. You never have. The silence on his end was different from Diane's. Hers had been thinking. His was calculating. She's my director, Claire. Do you understand how that looks? You told a room full of people I was the one your family doesn't talk about, I said. In front of your director, in front of Bethany's guests. I'm genuinely not the person who should be worried about appearances right now. He pivoted. They always pivot when the direct approach doesn't work. The analysis I sent to Amber's family, I helped with that. I was involved. You forwarded my emails. That's not, I contributed context. I know the property, I know the neighborhood. Derek, I said. I'm not going to have this argument with you. Call me when you'd like to have a different kind of conversation. I hung up. He called back twice that week. Then once the following week. Then the call stopped. What happened next I heard in pieces, from Diane directly, from Bethany, who heard it from our cousin Rachel, from the particular quality of silence my parents maintained when I saw them briefly at a family obligation 3 months later. Diane had already been conducting an informal review of Derek's work history when she called me. The Weston property analysis had been the thing that crystallized a pattern she'd been watching. Derek had, over approximately 18 months, presented collaborative or delegated work as his own in multiple client-facing situations. The most significant instance involved a landlord dispute resolution that had been substantially handled by a paralegal on his team, a woman who'd done the research, drafted the settlement language, and coordinated the tenant communication. Derek had taken the credit in the client meeting and in his performance review. There were billing irregularities, too. Hours logged to client matters on days when he'd been documented elsewhere. Small amounts but consistent. The kind of thing that looks like a mistake once and a pattern 3 times. He was placed on administrative leave pending review. His firm's ethics process moved quietly, the way those things do when a company wants to handle something internally before it becomes external. He and Amber separated. I don't know the full reason, I didn't ask and nobody told me, but the timing was what it was. The engagement ended. The duplex investment went forward without him involved. Amber's father managed it directly and, according to someone who knew someone, it's performing well. Derek moved back to my parents' house for a period. I learned this the way I learn most. Family news now. Indirectly, through Bethany, without seeking it out. About 6 weeks after the engagement officially ended, my mother called me. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was on my back porch with Hector dozing on the flagstone beside me, reading something I've already forgotten. She didn't start with pleasantries. "I want to talk to you about the money," she said. I waited. "When you were 19, she said, "your grandmother left savings for both of you, divided equally. You know that." I know. What I knew and had known for years was that my share, $28,000 set aside in a joint account with my parents as trustees until I turned 25, had never been there when I turned 25. When I'd asked, there had been a long conversation about investment losses, market conditions, the account being restructured. I'd been 25 and exhausted from working full-time through my early 20s, and I hadn't pushed as hard as I should have. Derek needed it, my mother said, for his first year of law school. "We were going to replace it. We should have told you." She stopped. I could hear her breathing. "He was so close to making something of himself," she said, and her voice was doing something I didn't have a name for. Not quite guilt, but adjacent to it. "We thought you'd understand eventually." I stayed quiet for a long moment. "Mom," I said finally. "I built my life without that money. I built it from scratch, working jobs that didn't pay enough, taking clients before I knew what I was doing, figuring it out alone. I could have used that money. It would have changed things. But I did it anyway." She started to say something. "I'm not calling to fight," I said. "I'm calling back because you called and you're my mother. But I need you to hear this. I'm not angry about the money. I'm past it. What I'm not past is the 30 years of being treated like I mattered less." The dinner. The introductions. The Christmases where Derek's accomplishments got framed and mine got nodded at. That's what I'm sitting with. She was crying by the end. Quietly, the way she cries. I told her I loved her. I meant it. I hung up. The contract with Diane's company extended, as these things sometimes do when the work is going well and the trust is established. I took on 2 additional properties in the 4th month, onboarded one of their junior staff members on the documentation system I'd built, and submitted a final report at the 6-month mark that got shared at a regional leadership meeting. Diane sent me a handwritten note afterward. I have it on my desk. It says simply, "This is what we needed. Thank you." I work differently now than I did before that dinner. Not because of the dinner, the work itself hasn't changed. But something in how I carry it has. I stopped waiting for someone in my family to notice that I'd built something real. I stopped doing favors that weren't framed as professional engagements. I started saying what the work was worth before I did it, not hoping someone would recognize it after. Hector is 16 now. He moves slower, sleeps more, looks at me with the absolute moral authority of a creature who has never second-guessed himself in his life. On the evenings when the work runs long and I come home to a quiet house, he's on the couch, and that's enough. That's genuinely, completely enough. Derek is in a different city now. I heard this through Bethany. Contract work, something administrative. I don't wish him badly. I also don't maintain contact, and I've stopped explaining that to people who ask. My parents are the same as they've always been. My mother sends me recipes occasionally. I respond. My father called on my birthday, which he hasn't done consistently in years. I answered. We talked about the weather and a documentary he'd watched. It was the most neutral, painless conversation we'd had in a decade, which is maybe what both of us needed it to be for now. I don't have a word for what my family is to me currently. Not estranged, exactly. Not close. Something like the right distance. Far enough that what they think of me doesn't determine how I move through my own life. Close enough that the door isn't locked and bolted on my side. I built the consulting practice. I built the client list. I bought the house. I kept the dog. I did the work without anyone watching, without anyone handing me anything, without anyone standing up at a table full of relatives to say that I'd done something worth knowing about. And then one day someone noticed anyway. That's not a lesson exactly. It's just what happened. Sometimes it takes a long time, and sometimes the person who sees you clearly is a stranger at the edge of your story, And sometimes you're already fine by the time they do. I was already fine. That part I want to be clear about. I was already fine. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that night at Bethany's graduation dinner. Not the part where Derek said what he said. I have made peace with that. I mean the part after, when I was driving home alone and my hands were steady on the wheel even though something inside me was burning. I remember thinking, I have fixed his mistakes, covered his oversights, done the work he couldn't do and didn't credit, and he just stood there and used me as a punchline. And the most honest thing I can say is that I let it happen for years. Not because I was weak, because I kept believing that at some point, effort speaks for itself inside a family. It doesn't always. Some people in your life have already made their decision about you, and no amount of quiet competence is going to rewrite it for them. What I've come to understand, slowly and not through any tidy revelation, is that the choices we make under pressure are the ones that actually define us. Derek made his. He took credit for work that wasn't his. He submitted expenses that weren't legitimate. He stood in front of a room full of people and chose to diminish me because it made him feel larger. Every one of those choices compounded, not because the universe was keeping score, but because patterns have consequences. When you build a professional reputation on borrowed credibility, it is only a matter of time before someone who knows the original work shows up. Diane had been watching for months before that dinner. The work I'd done spoke before I ever walked into that coffee shop. I think about Diane sometimes and what it meant that she noticed. She didn't owe me anything. She could have looked at the situation, decided it was too complicated, and moved on. Instead, she picked up the phone and asked a simple, direct question. Did you write those? That one question changed the trajectory of my year, maybe longer. And I think what made her ask it was not kindness exactly, it was integrity. She wanted the credit to go where the work actually came from. That's a form of intelligence that goes beyond technical skill. It's the kind of character that makes a person trustworthy, and trustworthy people tend to find each other eventually. The $28,000 my parents redirected, I used to carry that as a wound. Now I carry it differently. It taught me, the hard way, and too young, that I could not rely on anyone else to resource my own path, so I didn't. I worked jobs that didn't pay enough. I took clients before I was fully ready. I figured out the things I needed to figure out without a cushion. That's not a story of injustice anymore. It's a story of what I'm actually made of. The resilience wasn't something I'd built on purpose. It built itself, out of necessity, one difficult year at a time. What I want to say to anyone watching this who recognizes their own life in any part of mine, the work is not wasted. Even when nobody sees it, even when the person you helped takes the credit, even when your family looks away, the discipline of doing difficult things well, without applause, without recognition, without anyone framing it and hanging it on the wall, that builds something in you that cannot be taken back. It becomes the foundation everything else stands on. Diane saw it. I didn't have to explain it or argue for it or perform it. It was just already there. I'm already fine. I said it at the end of the story and I meant it. Not as a defense, as a fact.